Papaji would do very strong things to the people who he loved most, you know, who came to his house most often, part of his family, if you like. Not family, but
his
Sangha family. He would definitely be much tougher on those people.
And the people would know why?
Some of them would know why, some perhaps didn't really understand. But I mean, probably in those days I also wouldn't have understood. But for example, now I understand the more horrible he was to you, the more he loved you in a way. But that you wouldn't necessarily understand that, of course, unless you had a perspective on it.
Did this way of treating people bring development? Was it a path into freedom for these people who were treated that way, or was it?
That's always difficult to judge. You know? The effect of something is hard to judge, I think.
Have you ever met somebody without any structures, where you would say this person did not have any structures anymore?
Probably there's a man who I interviewed for the Indian Blueprints book called Ajja. And when I interviewed him, he was in his late 80s. And he had a very interesting life story. But anyway, by that time, he was having a small ashram with about 12 people. And again, there was a tremendous feeling of love in this ashram. When they prepared food or they served food, you could feel the love behind it. It was very beautiful energy. And he was like a funny little man, really, funny little man. And he was always laughing, and he seemed a bit crazy, actually. You could easily imagine he's a bit crazy. Very passionate, tremendous amount of energy for somebody who was, well, I think the first time I met him he was about 86, and then later he was getting on for 90, I think. And I would say he would be somebody who comes to mind as somebody having very, very little structures left. To the point that I think sometimes he didn't function. You know, I remember the first time I came to see him, they told me, well, unfortunately, he's not available. He's lying on his bathroom floor. So, you know, I mean, what to say, you know? So, I mean, yeah, I mean... But he was an amazing man. I remember we met him several years. And the last time we met him was about 3 weeks before he left his body. And we stayed for one night in his ashram. And I remember waking up quite early in the morning, around 6, because some noise outside my window. And I looked out, and maybe 6 men from the ashram, they were moving soil. They were making a kind of roadway. And sure enough, Ajja was there directing these 6 guys at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, because, of course, it got very hot in the daytime, so they did this work in the early morning. But there he was, directing this work, you see, 3 weeks before he left his body, probably 88 years old or something like that, you see. And amazing energy, you see, amazing energy. So in that way, I would say probably he has very little structures, because there's very little in the way, you know, just a lot of energy moving, tremendous amount of energy.
Now we come into concepts, but what then stabilizes structures? What are obstacles that stabilize structures and prevent us or prevent people from getting rid of the structures?
Well, of course, the main thing is that we are identified with being a separate somebody. So all these structures, to us, are not really structures. That's who I am. You know, I'm my structures, and by structures I mean patterns of mind. So we actually are naturally feeling these structures are who I am. Along with my body, that's who I am. So until you come to realize that that's not who you are, then structures are not really structures, they're just who you are. because we're completely attached for most people. But once you get some glimpses of another possibility, then you can also start to become aware of these structures. And here in our community, for example, that's one of the things that we try to be aware about, because here we work together. We have a few businesses. So 2 or 3 people will work together on different projects. And so in this working together, everybody acts as a kind of mirror. And in this mirror, if you're sensitive to what's happening, without much talking, you can see your structures. And then in this awareness of seeing the structures, simply by seeing them clearly, they tend to gradually fade. And if they're a very traumatic structure, maybe it takes some years to fade. If it's something quite small, unimportant, it fades maybe quite easily. And that's, in a way, what goes on in our community. And to help that process, we came up recently with this idea of having a buddy. So at the moment, when you work together with somebody, he or she would become your buddy. And if you have a nice enough connection, you can agree with your buddy that they will remind you when they observe you in a particular structure. Because one of the things that's very interesting is that it's very easy to see somebody else's structures, but it's not at all easy to see one's own structures. So by having this buddy system, as long as you can sort of thank your buddy for what he's just told you, because there's always this thing that you can feel judged, you know? And if you take it personally, and therefore you take it also as a judgment, then it's not going to be long before you don't like your buddy very much. But if you appreciate what you're getting from your buddy, then your buddy can be very, very helpful, because he can reflect not just as a mirror, but also he can speak to you and say, hey, look what you just did, you know, do you see this? So this is actually something we started fairly recently, and I think it must be working well, yeah? Yeah. But of course it doesn't work at all if you take it personally, because then it feels exactly like a judgment, and it feels just like what daddy always did, what mummy always did, and then you don't feel good. So it can be very misunderstood. And I think really it can only work when there's a lot of love, when there's a lot of connection between the people, as we have in our community.
Okay.
And then people are somehow supported by that energy, and then they're able to see these things not personally.
Okay. And then the seeing it not personally also guides into the direction of surrendering this I.
It's not that you really surrender it, because that's not quite how it works, but what I've experienced is that just by a clear awareness on something, that something can't really bite you anymore. Yeah. Maybe it bites you for some time, but gradually it can't bite you anymore.
It is there, but it doesn't bite you anymore. And
for example, in our community, and I think in the world generally, a lot of people from their childhood, they have this structure of, I'm not good enough. Pretty common, I think. And if you really examine this structure of I'm not good enough, you can see how it's been with you for 30 years maybe, 40 years, 50 years. And you absolutely, when this message comes, then you absolutely believe it. But how can anybody not be good enough for 40 years? It doesn't make any sense. So when somebody starts to reflect it, at some point you just see, well, that's ridiculous. It's just some sort of irrational message in my mind.
Do you support this seeing also with meditations, or guided meditations? Do you do that?
No, I don't do guided meditations, but we do meditate in the community together in the early morning, and as you saw tonight, we have dinner, silent dinner every evening.
And how is the setting for these meditations? Is it just sitting silent, or
in the morning we start with it was half an hour of something like yoga, different kinds of yoga or body movements. Different people from the community lead it each morning, and then every morning there's half an hour of sitting. So that's the morning one, and then in the afternoon it's something active, and then again sitting quietly. and the evening you saw us just eating dinner together quietly.
And during this sitting period, is there a recommendation, for example, doing things like a body scan?
No, I wouldn't recommend a body scan. I mean, I'm not really dictating how people should meditate, but my own preference would be that people simply sit quietly and just watch. They don't try to do anything. I mean, in addition to those daily meditations, we also have 4 evenings a week where we have satsang. Yes. So then that's also, 3 evenings also on top of the meditation. So actually there's quite a lot of, if you like, quiet time or reflective time.
This space is open then. Where this
and then in between we work a lot, quite intensely, but that's happening together. So it's like you have both a contrast of a lot of silence and also a lot of activity.
So no recommendations for the meditation themselves, it's just sitting silent.
Yeah, that would be my preference, but I'm not dictating how people sit.
So the way I learned it, and we discussed it on Monday, was having a body scan, ideally first, just to get contact with the body, and then already things can happen, and also to put oneself in an accepting state, so just neutrally observing what there is and not judging and accepting. And somehow, I personally, for me, this does very well.
Yeah, I think there are many methods of meditation, and I think in the end it's better that people continue what they're accustomed, what they enjoy in a way.
Yes. I think somehow the system seems to resonate with what is done, and it finds its way itself to a certain extent.
I mean, the other thing I can mention is that as part of our work time, or in fact part of our whole day, I'm encouraging people very much to do what I call self-inquiry, what Ramana Maharshi calls self-inquiry. And this is a conscious looking to see where the thoughts arise from. So rather than as normal, we take a thought, and immediately within split part of a second, we're saying it's my thought. So I'm talking, for example. So this is a reflective way of examining who is talking actually, who is talking. So by this self-inquiry, it's taking us inside and taking us to the source actually. And this is something that some people do quite intensely, or over a period of a year they have intense times of doing it, and perhaps they forget and then they don't do it for some time. But this is very much a central suggestion from me for the community. And when I have a retreat, we would then do it formally, kind of with my support. So it's very much something that I'm always encouraging.
So from where do the thoughts arise?
Yes. To ask this question, basically, who am I? Who is this I? And by asking this question, you come to, in fact, the source of the I.
Do you have such sessions really asking these questions, or do you call up people to this chair and have dialogues on this, who am I? Who do you believe you are? Or diets or whatever is available as methodology?
Actually, we do both things. When we have a retreat situation, I have a format of people sitting together, looking in each other's eye, and then one person will ask this question to the other. They'll say, well, who are you? And then you have 5 or 6 minutes and you talk and tell the person what you think it is. And then we close our eyes, and then there's some reflection, is this really who you are? So each person is reflecting, and then you change over. And we do this for some hours. And this is always very beautiful. Very often out of a group of people, several people will have an immense glimpse, because somehow the effect of the eye contact and the focus on this question together, it just brings people into a deep silence. And so often people will get very touched. People who have never done it before, who are kind of innocent, they get very, very touched perhaps. And somebody who, we've got people here who've done it, well, a few thousand times maybe. No, I'm exaggerating, but I mean the people who've done it for quite a few times, they will also often have very profound glimpses. So this is something that we do in a retreat situation, in a group situation. I also have a little format where somebody would come and sit with me, and I would do something like that just on a one-to-one basis. But that's a little bit different because usually I do that with the suggestion of looking whatever is going on. So people close their eyes, they look, and they might say, oh, a lot of thoughts now about dinner or something. And I say, okay, we'll just stay with those thoughts, just accept the thoughts, don't try to change anything. And usually very quickly, people go through maybe some feelings, some body sensations, and I say, accept it, accept it, accept it. And usually, quite quickly, well, it depends. If there's a support of a group energy, then maybe in 20 minutes, people come to silence, emptiness. And they start off, you know, maybe very kind of, and very quickly they just fall into this empty space. And often people are quite surprised. So I do that more on a one-to-one basis.
And do you recommend the people to stay as much time as possible in that state?
Well, I recommend them to always stay in that state. I mean, if it's possible, but you see, it's not possible because, you know, the reality is that, and even when you've clearly awakened, I mean, if I look back on my own last 20 years of my own life, I can see that, if you like, I've become more and more in this emptiness over the 20 years. But in the initial period of years, there was still quite a lot of structures appearing and then disappearing. So when a structure is there, of course, then you can't really stay in that emptiness. You get caught up with something. And so in our daily life, it seems to me that, you know, there's one thing about seeing, realizing, if you like, truth, and there's another aspect to actually living the truth. We could call this embodying truth. So, and again, one of the things that's going on in this community is that because we're all kind of focused towards that, the daily life is encouraging people to really ground the energy in the daily tasks. So in one way, our community doesn't look very spiritual. You know, we're not all walking around in silence with our noses in the air, you know, being frightfully kind of, you know, spiritual. So probably for somebody coming into the house for the first time, well, they might be touched by the energy. I'm told, I can't really judge it, but I'm told there's a lot of energy when you come into the house, so people can feel that energy. But then if they look around, they'll see people running here and running there. We're like a lot of ants when we're working. So they might not find that very spiritual. But if you take the whole week, then I think we could say we're a kind of spiritual community.
But what is spiritual? No. I have to ask this question. What is spiritual?
Well, years ago, I had lots of good ideas about that. But now I would say that actually there isn't anything like spiritual. You know, it's just life itself is spiritual. Everything is spiritual.
Or not spiritual.
Or not spiritual, whatever you mean by spiritual, you know. But people mix up, I think, you know, ideas about monks and, you know, a kind of
ideas, imaginations, or expectations.
I think people have ideas about what spiritual is, you know, and it's a lot to do with a certain serious kind of silence or something, I think, perhaps. And that's not happening in our community. I mean, we have these periods of meditation, of course. We have our meetings when there's a lot of silence, but we're also, if you like, doing an ordinary life. So we've got these businesses to run, phone calls to make. We have to go shopping for our food. We have to look after the kids. So we're doing all kind of ordinary stuff too. And in a way, the whole effort is to kind of embody this opening that's happened in the daily life. So to become present in the moment, whatever you're doing. I would say that's the intention of the community.
And this being present and this bypassing the structures, when this presence is there.
Yeah, the thing that stops us really being present is that we have some structure operating. Yeah, and one of the things we've also discovered over the years of living together, that almost everybody has some kind of trauma, which is like a strong structure. Some people, of course, have had some physical violence. Some people have had sexual violence, if you like, emotional violence when they were small. But almost everybody seems to have had something that was not a normal structure, something you could call a trauma. And that is not usually very obvious when you first meet people. It may even take a year before it would kind of come out. But as we've been living together for longer than a year, we are aware of certain people having these particular structures, traumas.
Traumas, okay. Yeah. And do you give the feedback, do you discuss these traumas with the people? Is there an open communication about this?
Yeah. We have meetings like this where we would talk about the traumas. And maybe if somebody, it's not always, people don't always see their traumas, or maybe they, on some deeper level, they know they have a trauma, but it's been blocked out. Yeah. It's very common with early violence or sexual violence that people kind of block it, so there's no conscious understanding of the trauma. The trauma is kind of subconscious.
It's subconscious programming.
But when you live together with somebody like that, you gradually notice that in certain situations, poof, they're not there. So what we've come to realize is that if you have a very strong trauma, the chances are that in order to deal with the pain of it when you are small, the body mechanism kind of took you out of your body. Seems to be quite common. So if the pain was very intense, then the human organism just left the body, so that you could survive in a way as a small person. Yeah. And then when you're an adult, you may still have this habit that when a trauma gets triggered, poof, not there. So, this is one of the things that the buddy system is helping. Yes. Helping people to see, you weren't really there for the last hour.
Okay.
And of course, in order to be able to say that to somebody, there has to be love, there has to be a feeling of well-being. Otherwise, you just feel judged, of course.
Yeah, as long as you cannot consider this as a support, bringing light into the own structures or whatever it is. And how to overcome such traumas? What is the experience there?
Not easy, actually. Not very easy. It seems that, if somebody doesn't really know much about their trauma, I would probably encourage them to have some trauma sessions with a therapist who's been trained for that kind of understanding. And we have one person in Cologne who several people in the community has been there to see this particular woman. And they nearly all find that she has some skill at kind of opening up what maybe has been closed. And maybe for a shorter time, maybe some days, people kind of feel they've been released from the trauma. But that doesn't usually last very long, unfortunately. So it seems that these traumas, they're not so easy to escape, you could say.
Did you yourself have a trauma, or did you somehow liberate you from trauma? So what is your personal experiences? Obviously, you are an awakened person, and somehow I assume this must have been overcome, if there was any. Yeah?
I remember after some years, maybe after 10 years of doing kind of what you could call spiritual work, meditating, I came to see that I have a structure which is kind of afraid of life. And I didn't really understand it because my memory of my parents was that I actually, I liked them and it seemed everything was pretty okay. And then I discovered, well, of course, I was born in 1944. So I was born just at the end of the last war. And my situation was that I lived with my mother, who was about 20. And my father was a doctor, and he was busy in the war. And I'm pretty sure that when I was very small, my mother had a lot of fear about the situation, because she'd previously lost her first husband 3 or 4 years before. She lost her first husband when she was very young. And so I have a feeling when I was in her body and when I was in my first year or two, there must have been an energy of fear. Mm-hmm. And maybe, you know, reading newspapers, the radio, maybe even there were planes and bombs and things. I don't know, really. So anyway, I have that trauma, I think. I think that was a trauma. And gradually, I had this sense that the fear that I could feel in certain situations was triggering this, if you like, an old memory of whatever was going on when I was very small. So I would say that was a trauma. And I would say probably, if I'm very honest, there's still a shadow of that.
Okay.
So in certain situations, I can get shaky, if you like, even now. Mm-hmm. But I think the difference now from, say, 30 years ago is that there's an awareness about it, mm-hmm. and in a way there's a freedom about it. So although it may come and grab me, it can be seen fairly quickly.
You can sense it. You can say,
you can sense something is tightening in the body.
This energy is coming now, yeah.
And therefore, somehow it's sensed. So after some time, you know, I would just sit and it would dissipate.
Yesterday I had a discussion with a friend in Cologne last night, and we discussed about such topics, and particularly he just says he cannot sense when a structure is playing out in him. Yeah? So something happens and gone he is, and he cannot sense it. He cannot sense it right in the beginning, and then it plays itself out. So this awareness of now this sensitivity for the structure playing itself out seems to be a good.
I think it needs years of awareness, actually.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I've been doing this kind of things for years, but probably it's only in the more recent years, say last 15 years or something, I would really be able to see those things. And probably people that know me very well might even say that they think I still don't see some things, and I would say they're probably right.
Yeah.
So this is quite interesting, because I remember when Papaji was about 86, the person who was writing about his life asked him about these structures. And they asked him, well, Papaji, you know, do you ever get kind of lost in these structures? And his answer was, ever vigilant.
Ever vigilant, I'm sorry.
Vigilant. Ever vigilant, meaning that he was always watching, if you like. He was always...
he was expecting it any moment.
Yeah, something like that, you know. So, I mean, I wasn't close enough to him personally to really know what that would mean, but if he said that, then presumably even at his age and with all his wisdom and tremendous energy, there were certainly certain situations where he also got something to trigger. Mm-hmm.
So you talked a lot about energy, and many, many times during our conversation until now. So what is this energy? Where does it come from? What is behind that?
Well, I think everything, in a sense, you could say is energy. And I guess I'm using this word energy rather than thoughts or feelings. In a sense, I guess when I use this word energy, I'm probably talking about beingness, or something like beingness would be another word.
Being, more being than being, more being than others. Who is there?
Somehow if there are thoughts, or if there's a feeling or a body sensation, that somehow is usually connected to me. But if there's no me, then I find myself talking more about energy. So it would suggest that well, it's rather interesting. I don't know. I mean, probably I haven't really looked so much. I mean, by energy, I know what I'm talking about. It's more like sensations. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, when a structure is working, there's a sense of something getting tighter, or some tension in the body, for example.
Which is also
or
energy.
Energy-wise, I could say the energy is getting kind of smaller, or something like that. And equally, when everything is flowing and there is nothing really in the way, it feels everything gets very expanded and light. And so again, I'd use the word energy. But okay. I'm probably talking about something that's just the natural workings of existence, I guess, of life itself.
Yeah, one can sense that there is different environments. That's how it's experienced in Reinhold. Yeah, so.
Yeah, when I met you the other day for the first time, you know, there was an immediate feeling that, oh, you know, lots of joy and lightness. Yeah, it was very easy to meet you, you know. So there wasn't so much a feeling of meeting somebody. It was more like the energy of this person is lightness and fun and joy, you know, this feeling. So then I would use energy or something. Joyful, light energy, fun energy.
Open, flow.
Yeah,
open,
you
flowing.
Could say kind of words like open, flowing. And equally, one of the people in the community spent yesterday afternoon with a friend. And when she came back, she said, oh, you know, such a lovely guy, but I really don't want to meet him again. I said, why not? Oh, so much mind, you see. So that she actually couldn't enjoy the good parts of it because she was so aware that, in a way, she could never meet him. There was no real meeting possible. And she was actually quite surprised. And it made, in a way, her realize what has been happening. She's been living in this community a year now. It made her realize what's been happening to her here, which, unless you have some kind of mirror like that, you can't really see, perhaps, because it's very subtle. The changes are very subtle.
And a lot of communication goes non-verbal. I mean, this is also recognized in industry when they do communication models. People are taught 90% approximately is non-verbal. It's just this energy exchanges or whatever happens there. And this,
yeah, I mean, you know, it seems to me more and more that you know, it's like there is an energy field.
Yes.
And what we call me and you is some kind of organism in this energy field, and there's just one energy field.
It's like contractions.
So we're not really separate. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about having these kind of dialogues. Who's talking and who's listening?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
So somehow using words like energy makes a bit more sense, because using the other kind of words, I'm listening to you. You know?
Yeah. So exactly.
It doesn't work really.
We're using words like I. The language, also language structures invite to separate and then sequentialize, so they create time also. And somehow this whole game is driven by the need or the opportunity to have a conversation between bodies. But even what is a body, or what communicates? No idea. There are apparent bodies, but where does that? What is the relevance of that body? No idea. The relevance of this body, I have no clue. And somehow a play seems to play itself out. And even when there are structures and there are communication blockages, like the one that you described with this lady from the community yesterday, it's also not relevant. Yeah. So
you see, we do things like shopping, taking the kids to the playground or the zoo or something. So you meet, if you like, people who live in a different reality. I mean, the normal reality, you can say, that nearly every human being lives in is this rather solid kind of reality, where when they say me, they have a clear meaning about it.
Are you sure?
Well, it depends. I mean, maybe they haven't even thought about it. Maybe they just completely accept this me. They haven't really ever examined this me. I mean, as soon as you start examining the me, then the whole thing crumbles, starts to crumble anyway.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I took from last Monday's discussion. Somebody after the meeting asked me, when did this, I believe it was you, when did this me, this I dissolve? I couldn't give an answer, so I never, in my story, that I never really knew who I was. I never had an impression that I reflected even that. Yeah. Somehow it was given, it was a habit to say I, and somehow it seemed to be related to the body, and this who am I question, it did not come. Only very late, and then it was rather vague.
I think most people live without examining that.
Yeah.
Because in the normal workings of society, the people we surround ourselves with, friends, work colleagues, our own family, they all support this idea about me.
It's not more but a habit.
It's just a habit passed down through generations.
Yeah.
And it's only when you start to examine it, or this lady we were talking about, Eva, we talked about Eva on Monday, who's a yoga teacher.
Yes.
So I mean, her thing seems to be that I don't know her so well, but she's obviously done meditation and yoga for some time. And now suddenly this question of who am I starts arising inside her very strong, and she has energetic things happening. And so now suddenly she's writing emails, and she's very interested to kind of understand about this me. So it just happens to some people, kind of spontaneously. And I think also sometimes it happens that while somebody's doing their normal daily life, like they're in a supermarket buying groceries, they could then just spontaneously, something happens. I remember meeting one woman, and she suddenly became very huge, and she seemed to fill up the whole supermarket, was her kind of way of explaining how she felt. So when something dramatic happens like that, then you can't really hold on to this old, normal, habitual idea about who you are. And then she talked to a friend, and this friend knew me, so then this friend brought this woman to me, and I said, well, actually, that was a nice experience, because that's probably more true than what you were thinking before. And then she started to attend meetings, and she became interested to understand who am I. So it can happen spontaneously like that. Somehow it seems that more and more people are interested. Less and less people are just accepting what was given from their parents, but maybe through the internet, through the communications, maybe there's something on the level of the planet. I don't know, there's something about the planet, I don't know really. But it seems that quite a lot of people are becoming interested in this examination. Whereas, 50 years ago, well, I'm not that old, let's say 30 years ago. 30 years ago, yeah, sounds much better. 30 years ago, I can remember that it wasn't really so common. And for example, when I became gradually interested, all the friends I'd had before, I couldn't really communicate anymore, because they were absolutely not interested in what I suddenly became very interested in. And so I wasn't interested to talk about football or last night's television or where should we go and eat or the weather, because I'm English, the weather, you know. So those topics didn't really interest me anymore. So somehow it wasn't really possible. So those friends disappeared out of my life. Yeah. And then I met new people who were somehow interested in the same looking that I was interested in.
This seems like resonances. Yeah? The resonances change. The frequencies change or something like that. Could be an expression.
I mean, look, for example, if you look at your story, I think probably when you came here on Monday you weren't quite sure, and already tonight you've had dinner with us, you've met quite a lot of the people, and you can feel something like fitting, you could say. I don't know if that's the right word, but you know, it's like an easy meeting for you here, I think.
It's all easy here, yes. Yeah. That's my experience here. It's normal. Yeah?
But maybe sometimes you're at some training conference now, I think. Do you find it as easy there at the training conference?
For me, yes. Yeah.
Yeah? But when you interact with the people at lunch, you know, for example, if there's 6 of you having lunch together, don't you find it's not so easy?
That's a good question. The meetings that I had this week were easy. Yeah. So it very rarely happens that there are situations which are not easy for this.
Yeah. For example, because I do all these meetings, I'm talking a lot, you know, hours on end.
Yes.
And in the daily life, I'm also talking a lot. Yeah. But actually, if I go somewhere, actually, I'm quite happy not to talk at all.
Yeah, that's what I usually do. I do not talk very much.
Right. But then, of course, the ordinary society would find that slightly, there's some tension in that, you know, because most people are always chit-chatting to each other.
Yeah, okay, I cannot comment. I prefer to listen and to see what happens. I don't know what in the others happens then. I mean, I love jokes and try to get the humor out of every situation. Somehow creating stories and associations. I think this is welcome. Most people laugh, so I assume are not too angry about it.
Right.
But what is really going on inside them, I have no clue.
I mean, it's very easy for me to start asking you questions, actually. So one question is... I've done a few too many of these things. But anyway, it's interesting for me a little bit. So, I mean, would you feel yourself falling more into an acceptance of some destiny unfolding?
I would not even touch the word destiny. I just have no clue. And I can accept that. I can allow myself to have not the faintest idea of what is going on.
Right.
So, but now I have another question. What about these spiritual names? What is...
The names I give people in the community?
The names you give people, you yourself have a name. Right. What is the tradition of this, and what is the energy of this, or the meaning?
I think it's part of the Indian tradition that a master will give a name to somebody. And my own sense about that, well, for example, if somebody would ask me for a name, I would try to find a name where I would see I can encourage somebody. For example, we have this very quiet man over there from Portugal, and my impression about him is that actually he's quite a powerful guy, you know? But you would never really know at a quick glance that he's a big, powerful guy because he's quite small and he doesn't really express himself so much, you see. So when he asked me for a name, I gave him the name Shiva, you see, which is kind of is the strongest kind of male energy you could have, you see. So the idea of that, for example, is to encourage somebody to come into that potential, which I can see there, you see. There's another gentleman over there, and I gave him the name Raj, which means king, you see. And because of his difficult childhood, he wasn't really living like a king. He was more like the king's servant, I guess, yeah. So by giving him the name king, I'm encouraging a certain potential I can see there, you see. And these names can change quite easily. I mean, we change them also. When somebody appears to be ready, we give them a new name that will encourage some other aspect.
So each time he is called that name, he is reminded of, look, this is...
Well, he probably isn't anymore, but in the beginning, perhaps, one is more conscious about it. For example, my name, it came to me in a slightly funny way because my own master hadn't given me a name. I was using my original name. But somehow visiting one of the Indian masters I was visiting for my book, I became we came into a very loving space together, I think. He was somehow touched by me and I was very touched by him. And one day the words come out of my mouth, would he give me a name, And then he gave me a name which actually I didn't quite like because he gave me the name Sadananda. I can't now remember what it means in Indian, but in kind of the Western feeling of it is kind of sad, So I didn't really like this connotation of Sadananda, So I said, well, could you find another name?
You ask once, why not ask a second time?
So anyway, it was all very playful. So anyway, and then he chose this Premananda, you see. And that was a little bit more shocking because the real meaning of Premananda is something like unconditional love. So in a way, when I got this name...
That's a tough one.
I felt like, well, this is really encouraging some big potential, And it still feels very much like that, I don't feel I've got anywhere near this name,
Yes.
But it's like really encouraging me for probably a few more lifetimes even. So actually many times I felt a bit like I should shake off this name, But actually because I had a very lovely connection with him, it's still, I just leave it, I just leave it. So I think it can be quite a useful device if you don't take it seriously to have a name, spiritual name.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as people understand it's not because we're a cult or a sect or something like this, when it's only for the person himself or herself to have a kind of constant reminder, And I'm not thinking about my name all the time, but sometimes something happens and then, it's hanging there, and I'm like, oh God.
So, do you have you have a buddy who then says Premananda, Premananda? What about reincarnations?
Reincarnations. I always find this a difficult topic. I don't really know what to say about it. I think anything I would say about it would only be some sort of concept which makes sense, to make sense to my intelligence or something. I can say there's a concept, And of course, in a lot of the traditional spiritual religious systems, they completely believe in reincarnation. So in the Hindu system, in the Tibetan Buddhist system, they very much even formalize this belief. For example, the Dalai Lama, when he leaves his body now, before he dies, he will leave some letter or something where he's giving some kind of clues or some informations. And then they have, I don't know exactly how it all works, but anyway, they have a group of people who take this information a few years after he's left his body, when they have some feeling that he must have by now reincarnated, and then they go off searching for some small boy, and they take some of the possessions of the previous Dalai Lama, and it seems that, they have their ways of telling, okay, this could be the Dalai Lama. I don't know. So I don't really know what to do with that, because in another sense, it's hard to imagine how that works. But I can also imagine that it can work. So I don't really understand it, but I can also be open to the possibility that it does work. Because in a way, if in fact it's all one kind of big soup of energy, and the human body is a bit like a spider who brings out of its own body, you know, the spider's web, yeah. And then when he's finished doing his fly fishing, he then takes this web back inside again. So there's this sense that, you know, you can have a body and then you drop your body and then you get a new body, you know. So I can imagine it can work, but I'm not so interested really. I mean, it's not really important.
Yeah, who then would, or what would reincarnate?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can see the possibility that there is some kind of essence which can reincarnate. I'm open to that possibility. But anything I really would say, I would have to say is only a concept because I don't really know.
It's my feeling is also there is continuous change and flowing and bodies getting born and passing away and matter shifted and energy shifted. This vastness.
I mean, I have one, you know, being sometimes a bit logical, I sometimes wonder, well, how does it work when the population of the planet is getting more and more, you know? So if it's getting more and more, how does that work then? It's going to split into two and, you know, you get half of, you know, because, you know, the population is, you know, increasing very dramatically now. So I don't really, you know, logically, or it would only be concepts. I don't really know.
I share that one. What about the master-disciple relationship? You talk a lot about surrendering to a master.
Do I talk a lot about that?
I think so. I think so. You talked in past satsangs. I saw some statements when you said, surrender to the master, and somehow, how does this work?
I think from my own 30 years history, you know, I fell into having two masters, and I would have to say that in both cases, when it happened, there was even a resistance from me that I didn't want a master. I mean, when it happened the first time, I didn't even know what a master was, actually, the first time. And then later, I knew what a master was, but I didn't really have any idea I needed a second master. So actually, in both times, it just kind of happened despite any idea I had or about it. But if I would look back on all that, it seems to me that I got a great benefit from both meetings. In the first case, you know, I was working as a normal guy, as an architect. I had kind of questions inside. And by bumping into this first master, he basically just kind of took me and, you know, slapped me around a bit and got me meditating, and my whole life changed because of the contact with this man. And when I first met him, I was one of these kind of English, middle-class, professional, I know pretty much everything kind of people. You know?
Yuppie.
Sort of yuppie, yeah. I was a real yuppie with white suit, you know, a little moustache and, you know, gold-rimmed glasses and, you know. So, but, I mean, when I met this master, it was like, wow, you know? It was like, wow. Even though I didn't really, in the beginning, like him very much, but somehow he was just so amazing that I was completely shocked, basically. I was completely shocked by this human being, you know, because what he was talking about, I mean, I never even thought about most of the things he talked about, but somehow when he talked about them, they seemed to go deep inside. I was very touched. And so touched that I very quickly kind of gave up my whole life to spend time with him.
Was he a real master traveling around giving satsangs, or was
No, he was Osho, who was originally Rajneesh.
Ah, okay.
And he was an Indian master staying in his ashram. So you had to go to him. He had been traveling in India before, but by the time I met him, he was only staying in his ashram. But he was very available. He would come for 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening. So he was pretty available, but not in any personal way.
So, but you went to Pune or where his ashram was to meet him there?
Yes.
And curiosity drove you there, or what was it?
Well, it was actually it's a very strange story, because actually what happened was that I was an architect living in Tokyo in Japan. And I went to visit a German architect, a professor of architecture, in fact, to talk about Japanese architecture. And so it just turned out that he was a disciple of Rajneesh.
Okay.
So when I went to meet him, I thought we were going to talk about architecture, but actually we talked about chakras and meditation and masters and blah, blah, blah. And I remember in the morning, as I was leaving his house, he said to me something like, "You're really ready for this." And I remember very clearly my mind said, "I'm not interested." You see? So there was this strange situation, really.
Okay.
And then existence picked me up and put me to his ashram, basically. I was never interested to go there. I just was picked up and put there. And when I was there, it was like, wow, you know, and it's like immediately, almost within seconds, it just felt like, oh, this is the right place. Immediately, it was very instantaneous. And then I went to meetings with Rajneesh, he was called, and it was like this amazing man sitting there talking about all kinds of amazing stuff, which I was very interested in, but I didn't know I was interested in. So that was how the first master happened. It was, I mean, it just happened, I can say. And looking back on it, it was an amazing time. It completely changed my life.
And how long did you spend there?
Well, I was coming and going for 15 years. And I lived, I can't remember now really how, I mean, I lived for quite long periods because I didn't have so much interest to keep going back and forth. So I somehow managed to make a living by staying there. So I was living, I don't know, about 5 years perhaps I lived there.
So would you call this relationship that you surrendered to this Rajneesh? Or who surrendered, or the surrendering?
Well, I would say when it was happening, I was just completely in resistance. So there was this attraction. So there was one part of me saying, wow, amazing, yes, you know, so there was an attraction. And then there was another part saying, absolutely not, thank you very much. I don't need a new name. Why should I have a new name? You know, and I had all my English conditioning working, you know, so there was a sort of something happening, you know, for a few years probably. But what really happened, if I look back on it now, what happened in those 15 years was surrendering, but not surrendering to him. So,
okay.
you know, it was like, in a way, what I can understand now is I was surrendering to the self. It wasn't surrendering to him as in somebody. So there was a surrender happening, but there was nobody surrendering. And somehow by being with a master, there are all kind of devices that happen, which create a kind of surrender. You know, you have sort of, there's resistance and there's openness, and these things kind of work together. And somehow the play is that you become more and more surrendered, but not to him or her. You become surrendered actually to your very own self.
To the self.
Yeah.
Did Osho or Rajneesh, did he work also with terminology like structures that we have discussed initially in our conversation, or did he do other things?
I don't know, he was an amazing guy. He taught something like 500 books, you know, so he pretty much talked about everything that you could possibly talk about. And I don't really remember exactly him talking about structures, but I can't imagine he wouldn't have talked about structures. But for sure, in the ashram, which he very much, I mean, he wasn't there, you know, present in the ashram, if you like, but he was completely in charge of the ashram, I would say. And in the ashram, he invited many kinds of different therapists. So he was very aware, I think, of structures of the mind, and he, if you like, worked on them by inviting people who worked on them.
Yes, okay.
And in his own talks, he was more talking, he was more discussing, you could say philosophy, I suppose, or he was discussing different masters, how they worked, what their ideas were. You know, he was talking about Jesus and Buddha and Lao Tzu, and he tended to be more on that level. And the work on structures, if you like, he left more to people that he encouraged to spend time in the ashram. So I think he consciously was working with people's structures, but not personally, you could say. And
now in your work, when you head this Open Sky House team, or you are the focal point of this, do you consider yourself as a master, or do you have some...
I walk around all day with a whip, you know.
Some hierarchy.
And if they're not working enough, you know, I strike them 3 times, you know. I'm definitely the master, you know.
So,
yeah. No, it's not. It's a little bit different. No. Not much. Not much. No, I mean, I never would sit down and say, oh, you know, I'm a spiritual master. You know, nothing like that. I mean, it's like I'm more like if I would have some identification, it would be like a playful kid. And I've seen my role as causing things to move or something, you know, like kids pull the, you know, you make a house of cards, you know, and the kid comes and pulls one out and it all falls down.
Yeah,
you know?
okay.
So it's more like that, I would say.
Playful, you know? Kid.
And maybe sometimes it's very playful and sometimes it might not be so playful. So there's a range of effect, you could say. But in another way, I could say I'm a master, you know. I mean, maybe if I would consider, you know, in a public realm or something, I would say to myself, well, I think I'm rather masterful. So then I would, in that way, consider myself a master, but not in the way most people would imagine that. It's more that I can see sometimes something happens, which I can say, wow, that was amazing. And then I could say, oh, that was masterful, something. And also, I'm because of my own background, as far as I can see, there's tremendous advantage in working with somebody like a master. I mean, in your case, you were having some strong influence from this Jesuit master, but you also had a strong sense of doing it yourself. Yeah, so you, in a way, had both things happening. But in the end, you followed his
100%, yes.
his advice and his teachings. Yeah?
It was some kind of trusting. Yeah? So we said, this feels good, now go for it. It's very much like the resonance story that you talked with Rajneesh. Yeah? So not so excitingly related to this person, but there was a deep confidence. Yes, this makes sense.
I think it's like a love affair, you know. If I would think of my connection with Osho, for example, I did have a few little bit meetings, but basically it was just a tremendous kind of projection of my love or something, you know.
A projection.
Kind of, yeah. And it happened also over time. Yeah? In the beginning, there was a lot of resistance, I would say. A lot of not understanding and a lot of resistance, and it took time, and there were some devices along the way, and more trust, and you know. And this got even stronger when I went to my second master, because it was a completely different situation. With Osho, he was a very splendid, you know, white marble, Rolls Royces, you know, deluxe, fantastic master. And then when I went to Papaji, he was exactly the opposite. He was scruffy T-shirt, tattoos on his arms, coming in a van. You know, he was completely ordinary. You know, you couldn't really see him as a master after being with Osho. You know, there was a sort of something.
A master should be different. Yeah?
I mean, I had been conditioned to imagine what is a master, and then I met this guy. He didn't really fit the right, so he didn't have the right clothes or anything, you know. But of course, gradually, as I spent time with him, because he was very available, And I remember when I first arrived, in the first few days, having 2 very personal meetings with him, much more than I'd ever had in 15 years with Osho. And in the beginning, I was like, I suppose, a bit innocent, and so I was like almost throwing myself into his house, until suddenly it was like, oh, wait a minute, this is a bit dangerous,
Okay.
And so gradually
this is a good
something happened, and I realized that although he's very welcoming and, have lunch, and of course you can stay, and actually there was a danger, and I didn't realize it in the beginning, but very quickly it became clear that on the one hand it was beautiful to have this close contact, but if I wasn't careful, he'd cut my head off, which he did, quite quickly. So it was what I wanted,
yes.
And at the same time, it was what, in a way, I was most afraid of. So these 2 things were working.
But you went with the awareness that you want to get your head cut off to Papaji.
Not quite like, quite like that, but yes, absolutely. I mean, I'd been like that already for some years, you see. And I didn't know it then, but now I would say that it was very necessary to have this much closer contact. So in a way, as a beginner, Osho was wonderful because he set out all kinds of techniques for meditation, therapy, and so on. He made beautiful talks that gave you lots of enthusiasm and blah, blah, blah. So as a beginner, he was very good master. But at a certain point, I think it was very important to have a different kind of master who was much more available and who could really see you on a personal level, could see your structures, be a mirror to those structures, and really work on a almost hands-on kind of way. So I think I was very lucky because, as I said before, I wasn't really, both masters just showed up in my life. And I think I was very, very lucky.
You're lucky when you have this.
I feel it was a great gift, actually. But I'm also aware that for lots and lots of people, the whole concept of having a master is completely not something they could accept or could want or even understand, maybe. So I know it's quite challenging for people.
To go into a situation that they say, I have a master now, so to say, to position oneself in a hierarchical relationship with somebody, or what is it?
At the beginning, it feels probably hierarchical because you probably project daddy or mummy, depending if it's a man or a woman, you project those kind of things onto that person. So in the beginning, it's maybe there's a feeling of, he's the boss or something. I know I felt that with Osho, I mean, he was... certainly my projection onto him was like a super daddy or something, a very wise super daddy. But gradually you come to realize it's not really, you realize that it's just a projection, it's not really like that, And this is where going to be with somebody like Papaji, lived in a small house, came in a van, you could go and have tea with him in his house, you could talk to him very easily. Although, as I say, there was always this feeling that he could just quickly get his sword out and cut your head off, at the right moment. But there was a sense that well, in the beginning, the master is like beyond, like you make the master as a sort of special, beyond, and therefore you make yourself less. But over time, you come to see that actually it's the same, that there's no difference. And that realization there's no difference is almost a bit scary. I remember years later, I went back to Pune and gave some meetings, some spiritual meetings, down the road, just down the road from the ashram, where for many years, I was very much in this role of having the master, and suddenly I'm sitting there having my own meetings. That was very confronting in the beginning, and then somehow it changed, and then it was it just happened, it just kind of happened.
It became natural. It was accepted. It was
Yeah, because anyway, I'm not thinking myself as the master or something. I'm not. But it's an amazing moment, actually, when you suddenly realize there's no difference.
It's the same,
yeah. And in a way, you could say that that's the whole journey. The whole journey as a seeker is to come to the point where you realize you're the same as the master. There's no difference.
And the good master will always pull you there.
And the whole effort is that you come to see that, and then in a way it becomes more and more friendly, you can say, and you can only end up as friends, actually.
Yeah.
Maybe completely different personalities, different kinds of things, but in the end there's no difference. And when you realize that, for example, I've done these interviews for my books over the last 8 years. I've interviewed about 50 masters. And I had respect for each one, but I never felt that we were different. So I could sit with them very naturally, and I was being Premananda, and they were being whoever they were, and we had a meeting. And that was very, very beautiful. I mean, I feel completely touched from being able to have that experience with many, many beautiful masters. It's an enormous gift. I mean, when I think about it, I can't imagine how it happened that I've met all these many, many masters. And to meet them, if you like, well, with respect, but I could say equally. I mean, with respect for who they were and what they've achieved and so on. And so a lot of respect, but to see that fundamentally we were the same.
There is one master in Pune, she's called Dolano, I believe. She's a German, and I think you interviewed her as well.
Yeah, she's in the European Masters book.
And she calls herself a radical Zen master. That is what I saw in her internet or somewhere.
Yeah.
What is that, and how does she work? What does she do?
Yeah, I think you have to ask her. I don't know exactly.
Okay.
I mean, I like her a lot, actually. She's kind of salty German woman, you know, but she's lived in India for many years. So, how can I say with her? In a way, for me, I found her always quite funny, you know. I could enjoy her a lot. She's really, really a character. She's really a character. But then every master is a character. And each master, I mean, the reason you could call somebody a master in a way is that they have no fear just to be themselves, you know. They're doing their life, whatever it is, 100%, and they have no fear about it. So in the end, they become a kind of character, you could say, very different from all the other characters. So I always enjoy, I mean, in a way I can say I enjoyed all of them. It's like, you know, having a cellar full of good wine. It's hard to know whether you take this bottle or that bottle because they're different, but they're both going to be good. You know?
Understood.
Something like this. But I mean, one thing, when I talked about destiny, you didn't really want to take this destiny word, but now we've been talking about these two masters that came into my life. And in fact, there's a third master because already when I was with Osho, I had made contact with Ramana Maharshi through a picture, through a photo of him. And when I went to visit Papaji, he had a big picture of the same man. So actually, existence brought me first to Osho, then to Papaji, and then to Ramana Maharshi. So I actually feel I've had 3 masters in my life. And they all came to me without any intention. I wasn't intentionally looking for a master.
What is then the Ramana Maharshi story? I mean, when you met him, he was not in his body.
Yeah. I met him through a photo initially, and then I understood a bit about his teachings. And then through Papaji, Papaji was always telling, I'm a channel for Ramana Maharshi. So through Papaji, I met Ramana Maharshi, you could say. And then later I came to his ashram, and now every year for the last 11 years I've been to his ashram.
So what is a channel, being a channel?
Well, we're back in the realm of energy now, I think. You know, so I would say that everything that I've said tonight is, if you like, being channeled in the sense that I have no idea what I've said, and I had no intention to say it. I'm aware that my mouth is moving and words are coming out, but I have no idea about it really, and there was no thought about it. It's like
it happens.
It's just happening, kind of, you know, through the organism.
So how can you say this comes from Ramana Maharshi, or in the case of Papaji? Yeah? So Papaji said, "I'm a channel for Ramana Maharshi."
Yeah, he said that. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't say that everything I'm speaking is coming from Ramana Maharshi. I wouldn't say that. But in Papaji's case, he directly met Ramana Maharshi, and he spent a few years with Ramana Maharshi, and he was completely loving Ramana Maharshi. And
when you believe it is the self, and Ramana is the self, and you are the self, you cannot be other than the self. That would be a simple explanation.
For example, you know, there are many people that came to Ramana Maharshi, but for example, Papaji is an Indian man. But there was an American man called Robert Adams. He also came to Ramana Maharshi and stayed about 3 years when he was quite a young man. I think he was about 20 when he came there. And if you read his book, Silence of the Heart, he talked so amazingly similar to Ramana Maharshi, more from a Western point of view, you could say. But I would say he was a channel for Ramana Maharshi. But how it all works, I have no idea. For example, with this man, Robert Adams, when he was a child in his bed, he used to see a little figure walking on his side of his bed. And when he was a teenager, he discovered, opening up a book, that was Ramana Maharshi, for example. So when Robert would talk about being a channel for Ramana Maharshi, it's a different level of channeling that I would... how can I say it? Recognize or something, you know? So somehow I don't know how it works, but obviously this man had a tremendous connection to Ramana Maharshi, for however it works, I don't know. He went to see him, you know, and prostrated the first moment they met. Robert actually took his clothes off and prostrated on the ground in front of Ramana Maharshi, who was walking down the mountain. And Ramana Maharshi said something like, "Oh, I've been waiting for you," you know. So I don't know what all that's about, you know.
Okay.
And in my case, I had something a bit similar with Papaji. You know, our first meeting was a bit like that. Just poof, we met, sort of like it was meant to be.
So then let's discuss this destiny subject a little bit. You made me curious now. Yeah?
Well, I think it's very interesting, you see, because if I look back now from where I am here and look back 30 years, well, actually I'll be looking back 40 years. When I was 20, I had these kind of inner questions, some kind of inner question. And it seems that this inner question has kind of powered my life, you could say, because this inner question, first of all, took me hitchhiking around Europe, you know, then it took me to Japan, and then in Japan it took me to meet this man who introduced me to his master, and then it took me to his master, and then, you know, years later it took me to this other master, and then from that master I got introduced to Ramana Maharshi. So all that just happened, I could say.
Yep.
So I would call that my destiny unfolding, because there was nothing conscious about it. And in fact, consciously, I was probably resisting most of it. But it still happened. So it seems to me that there is some force inside us, or outside us, there's some force where our life is unfolding. And so if we can see that and accept it, we can a bit relax, you know, because it's like, anyway, it's going to happen, so you might as well just say, okay, you know. And then this idea that I'm doing my life, which is a lot of work and a lot of effort, you know. If I'm doing my life, you know, it's a big job then. But you can sort of see how things unfold, and if you don't care really what the destination is going to be,
then it's easy.
You can just accept it, you know. It's going to be, I didn't know, for example, I would meet you. You suddenly turned up on on the screen, and then suddenly you're coming here, and now we're sitting here. You know, so I mean, you know, I mean, it's a very nice way to live. I find it a beautiful way to live.
No intention. Yeah. Also here, it just happened. Yeah. It's also an experience. But destiny again would propose that there is something that controls it. Yeah? I don't know.
I don't know if control is the right word, but there is a kind of unfolding, I would say.
Unfolding.
There's like an unfolding, and how that unfolding is determined, I don't know.
Yeah, there are some sequences also in my story, together with my family, where I had the impression there were events that were like razor blades, one on the other. That in the end of the day, a certain result could happen. Such situations happened, or seem to have happened, and this gives us the idea of maybe something like destiny. But I don't even trust that one. So I don't.
Yes. And I think it brings up a sort of fundamental possibility that there's not really any point, you know. That life is not having a point or having a goal, or, you know, it's a bit confronting in a way, you know, because if I really believe I'm somebody, this somebody wants to do something, you know, and get some sort of credit for this something. But if there isn't really anybody and something is unfolding, then you can't really take it very seriously, because anyway, you know, it's like without any point.
Yeah, but this not taking it so seriously, this pulls you, at least this is the experience here, it has the tendency to pull into the present moment, into what actually is. And there is not much more than that which can be perceived. And thoughts are perceived, feelings are perceived, the body is perceived, so, and then it's finished.
Now we've done reincarnation and destiny, we could try death, you know, that would be another good topic. And it's like, as I'm getting older, for example, you know, I can't really have any idea about death anymore, you see. I'm sure when I was younger, there must have been a lot of fear about it. But now, as far as I can tell, there's no fear about it. And sometimes, I mean, it's like it becomes nothing, really.
It's not relevant.
It's not really, you know. It may be relevant to the person that's going to pick up the body and have to dispose of the body, you know. Then you know, it's not so convenient for that person, you know. But for the one who's dying, or you know, it seems to me that nothing really happens.
Yes, that was an amazing point when I saw that. That it's not relevant. It's. Yeah, it's also in line with this perspective of energy unfolding and condensating in different forms. Then no form can be relevant. So how can the body be relevant?
I remember some years ago, when I was living close to Papanji, I did quite a lot of abstract paintings. And one day I did a painting which I called Death. And I was quite surprised, because the actual painting kind of just spontaneously appeared, and then it was clear to me somehow that, oh, that's death, you see. And then I looked at this. Nobody else would see it as death, of course, because it was just little marks on the paper. But what death appeared to be was everything fragmenting. So it was nothing was really connected to all the other things. You know, it was like little bits of something, all kind of with space around, so sort of fragmenting. So somehow when I looked at this painting, I thought, yes, that seems to be exactly what death is. It's like everything fragments. And if you could say life is the opposite, it's all coming together, and everything is kind of...
like the wave that's created, it rolls a certain period, and then it
falls
decays
back in the ocean. And I therefore could imagine the possibility of reincarnation, that this is going, goes on and on in time.
It seems to be, here it is sensed as the most natural process that is, and that's life.
It's also interesting that from a scientific point of view, there's quite a lot of reports now about what they call near-death experiences, where somebody has died, apparently, their body seems to have stopped, but then this person has had some kind of happening, but then they've come back into the body, and then the body starts to be animated again, and they call this somehow near-death experiences. Mm-hmm. And it seems that it's completely joyful, even incredibly blissful, to the point where, in a way, people are given a choice, and it's like, well, I don't really want to come back, but because I've got a young son, I should come back, or something like this. It's like, it seems that there's something very attractive.
Mm-hmm. I've spoken to such a person. There was a TV movie a couple of weeks ago. He's must be quite famous, this guy. He's in Weimar, the conductor of the symphonic orchestra, and his near-death experience happened during a New Year's Eve concert. They were just performing the Ninth of Beethoven, and somehow he collapsed, and then they put him together, and he saw how they tried to reanimate him, and his feeling was, no, don't do that.
Yeah, I think it's not so much for me about understanding it, it's more just knowing it or something, Like, I feel like if I would look back enough years, there's a movement over these years where it's like moments of knowing have happened or something. And these moments of knowing open something. So you could say that there's more awareness or something like this.
Any feeling about, or any movement of control related to this knowing, controlling it through knowing it? So knowledge usually is used to control things, to facilitate things, to build bigger houses, faster cars, launch rockets to the moon or somewhere else. So this flavor of control, is it related to this knowing?
I don't really have so much to say about that. I don't really see it like that. Mm-hmm. If I would consider our community, for example, so it started without any idea to have a community. It was a sort of spontaneous happening out of a retreat situation where the people in the retreat would like to live together. So that's how it started. And if I look back over the 6 or 7 years we've had this community, it feels like it's got its own rhythm or its own life or something. So since we've been in this house, for example, as we've needed more accommodation, we've renovated another room, or we're suddenly given a bit more accommodation, and it's like something is opening, and it's almost like it opens according to its own rhythm or something. So I can see that. I mean, I can see that happening. I have some sort of intuition about it. And I might say, we're going to go and speak to those people. We might need to rent some more rooms or something. So there's a sort of intuition about this thing happening. But I wouldn't use a word like control for that.
So, okay, knowing not in the sense of controlling it, but just in the sense
an awareness about it. More
awareness,
like an awareness about it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That it unfolds.
That it's unfolding, and I mean, for example, people come into the community and people leave the community, and it may be there's some involvement from myself, but actually not really. So when I really see it, somehow somebody's drawn to the community. Maybe I talk to them a bit and get rid of a few of their fears or something, you know. But basically, they've just chosen to come here. And then equally, when people go, it's maybe looking like I'm saying, yeah, well, you know, maybe it's time for you to go or something. But actually, again, it feels like they're going, you know, they're coming and they're going. And it's like this is in the middle of it, you know.
Are there sometimes energies in you to recommend somebody to go after a certain time? Does that happen?
I don't know about recommend, but there's been times when I say, go.
Okay, that's all.
But whether it's like whether that's personally me saying that, it doesn't feel really personally that I'm sitting down saying, oh well, this and that and the other, and therefore you have to go. It's more like now is the moment for me to say go or something.
Okay.
And I can only see it happening after quite a lot, what you could call a long period of patience, and then realizing that that person's not really interested in what's going on here. Mm-hmm. But then anyway, I think they go anyway because they also see that, you know, they also see that it's not really working, then they go some other situation in their life.
So normally it happens out of itself then. Normally the people, when you say go, and you did it obviously, then...
A few times I said go when they might not have been planning to go, but yeah, I mean, different situations. Sometimes people have left who I would prefer they would have stayed, you know. And if I feel that, you know, that they're going when perhaps it would be better to stay, then usually we have a meeting of everybody. Mm-hmm. And then if the person is open for it, then everybody gets a chance and we'll give that person some reflection on the situation. And then if that person is meant to stay here, then they tend to stay here. Mm-hmm. Because maybe they had some idea or some fear came up or some resistance came up, and the way of resolving it was just to go. Mm-hmm. But equally, sometimes people go very suddenly and there's no time for any kind of process. They've kind of gone, you know, and it's okay, bye-bye, you know. And in a way, it doesn't really matter. Mm. And there's a little bit, sometimes I can almost feel like a miracle happens, you know, because maybe, for example, we've had we've probably had about 4 people who've done, well, 5 people even, have done website design, which is a particularly skillful means, you know, which we need in the community. We have a lot of websites, yeah. So if that person suddenly leaves, then you feel like, oh God, how are we going to manage? You know? But somehow the door opens and another person walks in and carries on doing website. You know, so you think, wow, how did that happen? You see, so
that's the mystery. Yeah.
You know, it's like, yeah. So in a way, what I see more and more is that this is a wonderful laboratory. This community is a wonderful laboratory where I can observe life, how it works somehow, how it's happening, how is the thing we call life happening. And I see it as a kind of microcosm of the bigger, you know, the city or the world or whatever, you know.
Interpersonal relationship and all that stuff.
Yeah, everything that happens everywhere else is also happening here. So it's so it's a sort of, I see it sometimes as a prototype of a possibility.
What about liberating people? Did some people reach that state of being a friend without any patterns when they were together with you, or is it rather a rare event? Or
I think it's a fairly rare event, in fact. There's been quite a lot of people either who had come close for some time but maybe not living with me, or people here in this community who've been living with me who have definitely had some kind of opening, have definitely glimpsed realization, they've glimpsed truth. There's no doubt about that. A lot of people, quite a lot of people. But it seems then that unless that is embodied, somehow the structures of the mind come and the person gets pulled back into the habitual patterns. So I don't have yet a clear picture how all that quite works. And so it just happens, you can say. And I would say, if I'm very honest, that there's been quite a number of people who initially I might have said, oh, that person is now self-realized, they're awake. But maybe a little bit later, some time has passed, I probably wouldn't say that. And there's probably only one person I would say that about. And she wouldn't agree with me, which makes me feel even more that it could be true. You know? And this poor woman, she was actually my wife, but we never had really a kind of husband and wife exactly situation. But we did live together for about 11 years, and I would have to admit, taking this woman on a pretty strong adventure, you know, or we had it together, a strong adventure, you can say. But I would think she is the only one I would say. Well, when she finally left the community, because we lived together in this community, when she finally left the community, we had a little goodbye party, and I said to her, I think I said to everybody something like, well, I don't have anything else I should do with this woman, you know. So that's only one person in 14 years. But there are many other people who I feel are either close to that or have had quite long experiences of that, but I wouldn't be able to say that I don't have anything else to do with them.
Okay.
And anyway, it's a very difficult subject, and whenever I try to think about it, I always feel like, well, anyway, it's not my business,
it's a difficult
and
question,
I don't have to bother about it, and it will work out somehow, you know. Like I can think now of a man who I met some years ago in Copenhagen, and quite quickly something happened where he felt himself very open. I also felt him very open, and for some time we were kind of friends, and I felt like, oh, he got it, he's really realized. But maybe later I wondered a bit about that. And then recently he's starting to offer his own meetings, and I can't feel a big, complete yes for that. You know, I can't really say, okay, I support you. He's not asking me to, but if he would ask me, I would have to say, well, I'm not really sure. I don't think I can really do that. But in the end, I don't care, because it's not my business, you know. And if it works out, it's fine. And if it doesn't work out, it's also fine. So actually, I don't really care about it. It's just not my business. And of course, people have all kinds of ideas about this subject, you know?
Yes, of course. This is the biggest obstacle.
Almost everybody that you meet will tell you, well, that one, and that one, they're not real masters, they're not really awakened. But that one, and one, they definitely are, you know? And everybody you would ask has a different team. So, you know, it's like nobody knows really, you know? So it's like, I think it doesn't work that way. It works in another way.
Yes, we are then close to get stuck into concepts again and ideas and matching expectations with what could be. This is very, very, very thin ice that we will be walking on there.
Yeah.
Still an interesting question. Yeah? I heard somebody talk about Osho, that in the early years he was different than in the later years, and that person gave the impression or the implication that Osho might also have fallen asleep again, or at least partially fallen asleep again.
It's endless, I think, endless speculation, you know, and I think it doesn't really matter, you see, because whether he fell asleep or he was asleep, the fact is he completely changed my life.
Yeah.
And for those years, I got a tremendous benefit. And even if I would say, okay, well, he wasn't really a master and he wasn't really enlightened and blah, 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 who cares? Because I got tremendous benefit from meeting him.
This is clear.
So in a way, I don't really care if he was or he wasn't, you know. And I think actually it's a silly game, all this speculation and judgments about masters. You know, people sitting in cafes discussing this one and that one as if they're choosing fashion designers or something, you know. I mean, it seems to me a bit silly because, I mean, in my own case, I definitely had a complete no to meet Osho. I didn't want to go to India, and I didn't want anything to do with Osho. He was not at all interesting. I wasn't interested in masters. I didn't even know what a master was. But existence picked me up and put me in his ashram. And then when I was there, it was like, wow, this is great, you know, and I gave up my whole life for this. So I don't think people need to bother about it.
So it's another thought game, another mind game.
Yeah, I think completely.
No use.
If you're meant to meet some, for example, a number of the people that live in this community have never spent time with any other master.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work, you know? Because there's piles of them around, you know, so how does that work? I remember when I first came to Germany, I didn't really plan to come to Germany, but when I came to Germany and started traveling, I was kind of passed from city to city somehow. And I was always like, well, it's very strange, isn't it? Because people come to my meetings, but actually there are so many spiritual masters or spiritual teachers in Germany. So why do these people come? And why do they come to my meeting when they've never been to any other meeting? You see? And I thought, well, this is all very strange. I don't know how it's working, you know? And then you don't have to bother about it, you know? It doesn't matter how it's working. Yeah, it's just working somehow. So this is also interesting because if you see, you know, these video things where they show also the audience that's there with some teacher, I mean, I can feel that every teacher collects around him a certain kind of people that fit with him. And another master or mistress will have completely different people. So how does all that work? I mean, it must be some energy phenomena happening.
Yeah, yeah, mm-hmm. That would explain it at least. Yeah.
I mean, this website, this interview is for a website where they have, I don't know,
Jetzt-TV
200 different masters, you see.
Yeah. I don't know how many, but
many, over 100 they have, I think at least. Yeah. So, I mean, why do you click on that guy's name and not on that guy's name or that woman's name? You know, so it's like it's very unimportant. I think. My own sense is it just happens somehow. It just happens. I've got a friend who, well, he's not really a friend anymore, but he used to be a friend, and he was always saying, you know, that he doesn't have to do anything because the people who he's supposed to meet, they will just show up in his life. And all he used to do was to make himself available by going to sit in a cafe every evening. So he would go, you know, to a cafe and sit there, and then people would come to him and start talking, asking him a question or something. This was his way of sharing with people, for example.
Was he a known teacher, a practicing teacher, or was he just a friend? He made himself available, finished.
He'd had his own master. He'd been for 2 years with a master, very well-known Indian master. And he'd had his own ashram back in California, in San Francisco, for some years, not so many years. And then somehow, I don't know exactly what happened, but it seemed he didn't want to teach, and then he lived rather quietly with himself. And then some years passed, and then again he was ready to share. And then when I met him, he was sitting in cafes and making himself available. But he would always say, well, that's all he did. You know, he just, by being available, the people who were meant to come and meet him, they would somehow come and meet him.
Okay. This is, again, an energetic...
Sort of an energetic thing, yeah.
That direction, yeah.
And I remember Papaji, for example, he was invited to Australia by some disciple of his. And when he came to Australia, he came to somewhere near Sydney, the guy who'd invited him was trying to get friends and people he knew to come and meet Papaji. And almost nobody was interested. This was quite a few years before Papaji was known. But the man's girlfriend was completely interested. So at a certain point, Papaji said, oh, well, there you are. I go back to India now. I've met this woman, and she was the one I came to meet, you know. And then he went back to India. So it's like, you know, what can you say? You know, it's not working as we think it should work, I think.
The best is not to think at all about these things. These stories expose it.
And this is true of the whole life, I think.
Yes.
You see, it's not just about spiritual life, but what we're really talking about is just life.
Yes.
And you can drop off the spiritual.
Yeah.
And the guys that I've interviewed, because sometimes people ask me, well, kind of, who's the best one, you know? Who would you recommend, you know? And, I mean, what I can see from meeting quite a few, you know, masters, is the one I would probably recommend is just very ordinary and very simple, actually. They're not what people imagine, you know, they're not something very grand or special. I mean, Osho's projection, how much he believed his own projection, I don't know, but, you know, he was somehow like a Hollywood's idea of a spiritual master, yeah? Mm-hmm. He had special clothes, he had a special platform, special chair, special car. I mean, everything was kind of special. I mean, he stepped right out of Hollywood, actually. And I think he did it deliberately, because back, I think, 30 years ago, it was probably what people like me needed. You know, I needed something like that.
But he was not attached to this lifestyle.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe he wasn't in the beginning, and maybe he became attached later. Maybe he got attached to his own game later. I don't know. You said maybe something changed, you know?
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, one never knows. And again, the mystery. So how could we know?
You see, I mean, because of all his special things, he created himself into a very special master, very far away. And the effect of that was to attract many people to him. So I've sat with him with 12,000 people, you know, sitting in front of him. So, I mean, so he would have had a conscious game that he decided to, you know, to play, if you like.
To play this.
You know? Because he certainly attracted really thousands of people. So his game worked, I think, because he, at that time, Krishnamurti had been very busy traveling around the world for 30 or 40 years.
J. Krishnamurti.
Yeah, J. Krishnamurti. And, you know, if you like, Osho became, in a way, the next important step, perhaps, and he attracted many people. He opened their hearts. Maybe that was his role, you know, and then maybe other things are happening now, different things are happening now.
So, J. Krishnamurti had this comparable attraction effects as Osho, is that?
Well, I think, I don't know really, I mean, different, yeah? I mean, J. Krishnamurti was very different.
He spoke in front of thousands of people, as I understand.
Yeah, I think he at certain times he spoke in front of a lot of people, and for many years, you know, there were many books and many meetings. He traveled between America and California and Europe and India. So this triangle, he traveled for many years. So he had a profound effect, I think.
For me, he had a tremendous effect.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was when I saw the first videos, I thought, "What is this guy saying? Is he crazy? Time is thought."
Right.
What is this? But somehow this triggered questioning.
Yeah. I went to one or two of his live meetings, and he would stop every so often, and he'd look at the audience. He'd see that nobody was following him. He'd say, "You are following the speaker." And he could see nobody, or hardly anybody was following him, but, you know. So yes, I mean, it was difficult to understand what he was telling sometimes. And at the end of his life, there's a very beautiful book that, at the end of his life, they put a tape recorder sort of on by his bedside or something. And there's a book from this tapes, and it always touched me very deeply, because somehow by the time he was leaving his body, he was quite old. I think his body was 80 something. And he had this profound sadness that nobody ever understood him. You know? So, if that was true or not, I don't know, but he somehow felt like that. And there's a famous reflection that his last talk in Madras, which is now Chennai in southern India, he used to go there maybe every year or something, I don't know. In a way, that was where he started his whole thing in Madras. And there's a story that on his last visit, before he had to go back and then he couldn't travel anymore, there was a man in the audience, and he looked at this man, and he said, well, you've been sitting there for the last 40 years, you know, and basically saying, well, what are you doing sitting there, you know, do you really not understand for 40 years? You see, and it's also very, yeah, it's like, yeah.
What can you say?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah. But he was very lovely. I mean, I had, as I said, I think I attended 1 week of his meetings every day, and I remember him as a very, I can't really remember what he said, but the way he said it and the kind of, the aura, his aura was very lovely actually. He had some kind of elegance, some old-fashioned kind of elegance or something.
Very style, I don't call it. He was a gentleman, so some kind of, I don't know, yes. But not arrogant at all. And what I see in these videos, so
very simple.
He always said the speaker is not important at all, and when they clap their hands, he said, why do you clap your hands?
I think he had a structure about that actually.
Probably, yes, sure. And
who's dialoguing?
Yeah, who's dialoguing? So we had J. Krishnamurti, Osho. Nowadays, one of these big magnets, Eckhart Tolle, I think, is one who is.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a copy of his book Power of Now when he first self-published it. So I don't know how long ago that was. It was, must have been about 15 years ago, I think. And I remember a friend gave me this book. I think she'd been to America and she came back to us. I was living in Australia at the time. She came back and gave me this book. And I remember looking through this book, and everything I read, my sense was, oh, I could have said that. In fact, I am saying that, you know? It was like a... And I think it's a brilliant book, actually.
It's brilliant,
because
I read it,
in a way he wrote it in a very simple language, and it's a book which almost anybody can access. So it's been very, very successful because everybody can be touched from some part of this book. Yeah. So I think, yeah, he deserves somehow this being a big strong magnet, because he has a way of expressing things which are very clear. For example, I watched 1 or 2 of the programs he did on television with Winfried Oprah. So, I mean, in those programs, he went, each program was one chapter of his book about planet Earth, yeah? What's it called? New Earth.
The New
Earth, I think. And it was such a funny, for me, it was such a funny television, because there he was, completely boring looking, completely quiet looking, completely not television material.
Yes.
And then sitting next to him was this woman who was like the best television kind of person in the world, and waving her arms and talking and talking and talking. And then she suddenly noticed he's not saying anything, and then she'd say, ask him something, you know. And it was a beautiful television, because in the end you could feel something very special about this guy, which you could completely miss in a way, because he's looking quite ordinary, I would say.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. What about Anthony de Mello? That's another Jesuit. Did you have any contact?
I've heard his name, but I have to admit I don't know so much. Yeah. We were talking earlier that whether it's the Jesuit way or the Vedanta way or the Zen way or the Sufi way, or you know, there are different, many different spiritual systems or paths, if you want to call it like a path. It's not really a path, but anyway. But we agreed very easily it all leads to the same source, yeah? So